XEX606-1 is a number which gets us Beatles collectors really excited, for that's the side 2 matrix number of the first UK mono pressing of their 1966 album Revolver. The reason for this excitement is that it contains an alternate version of one of their most innovative and groundbreaking tracks, Tomorrow Never Knows. Hi, I'm Andrew from Parlogram Auctions. The version of Tomorrow Never Knows contained on earliest UK first mono pressings has for many years not only been the subject of fascination for Beatles collectors, but also one of confusion and misinformation, which I hope to be able to clear up in this video. The story of XEX606-1 began on Wednesday, April the 6th, 1966, in Studio 2 at Abbey Road. That was the session which produced the first 3 takes of John Lennon's newest composition, Tomorrow Never Knows, although at that point it was known only by its working title of Mark I. The rhythm track recorded that evening consisted of Ringo's drums, Paul's bass, George on tambura, and Lennon himself on lead vocals, which were fed through a Leslie speaker. It was Paul who came up with the idea of creating the track's hallmark tape loops, which were to be played simultaneously on other tape machines and then mixed live onto track 2 of take 3. There were in fact 5 distinct loops used on the track. The first was a laughing male voice, some say it was Paul's, speeded up, which is the seagull-like sound. The second was a B-flat minor chord played by an orchestra. The third and fourth loops were provided by the mellotron. The third on its flute setting and the fourth using its string sound, alternating between B-flat and C in 6/8 time. The fifth loop was a rising scale played on a sitar, reversed and sped up. On the 27th of April, 9 mono mixes of the track, still entitled Mark I, were made at Studio 3 by producer George Martin and engineer Geoff Emerick. And from those 9 mono mixes, number 8 was temporarily marked as best. The duo returned to the same studio again on June the 6th and made a further 3 mono mixes, of which number 11 was selected, and that became the new best and was marked for inclusion on the album. The cutting tape was duly assembled and arrived at Room 8 at Abbey Road on the 6th of July, where Chief Cutting Engineer Harry Moss made the first mono cutting of the album and then sent it to the factory for pressing. It was late in the evening one early July night when the telephone rang at Abbey Road. They wouldn't have been surprised to hear George Martin on the other end, but one can only imagine their consternation when he ordered them to stop the presses so he could substitute the mixes of Tomorrow Never Knows. If any one of EMI's other artists or producers had requested such a change, it would have almost certainly have been denied. But as this was the Beatles, EMI had no choice but to accede to his request. Harry Moss was no stranger to recutting Beatles albums, as nearly all of their previous albums had, for one reason or another, required recuts. So it can't have been much of a surprise that when he came into work on the morning of Thursday the 14th of July, he found a job sheet on his desk instructing him to recut side 2 of the mono Revolver. That actual document is shown in a tiny picture on page 104 of the Beatles in Mono book from the box set. The July 14th document, marked Urgent, asks Harry to create a -2 submaster of XEX606-1 by retransferring a re-edited tape, which I presume was attached to the note. This would replace the first -1 cutting, which the document shows us as having been done 8 days earlier, on July the 6th. Interestingly, the note also shows that a -3 cut was also made very soon after that. The -3 note is in a different colour ink with a small date beside it, which, although not being 100% legible, does show that it was done in July. So although the exact time distance between these 2 cuttings is unclear, they were certainly both done well before the album's August 5th release. Interestingly though, it appears that by 1969 the -3 cutting had for some reason been discarded, as the final mono pressing from 1969 uses the -2 cut only. However, back to 1966, and although EMI had agreed to accept the change, it made it clear that it had no intention of scrapping the discs it had already pressed. So now the big question is, how many 606-1 copies were actually made? In order to do this, I've looked at the stamper codes of over 200 copies of the 606-1 pressing, and the latest stamper code I found was 4AM. Now, by decoding those figures, we know that that disc was cut from the 34th stamper of the fourth mother. Now, contrary to popular myth, the life of a stamper was not 300 copies, but more like 3,000, or even up to 5,000. So by taking 3,000 for this calculation, it could be deduced that those initial 34 stampers produced, say, 102,000 copies. Now, EMI's factory had approximately 120 presses at that time, which gave them the ability to produce about 120,000 records per day. So that 102,000 figure is certainly within the realms of possibility, and we could be correct in assuming that there was indeed just a single day's production of 606-1. Of course, the album was pressed in stereo too, but that format only accounted for as little as 10 or 20% of production at the time. And as none of the stereo pressings have the Remix 11 version of Tomorrow Never Knows on, it's likely that the stereo pressing was started well after the mono. As with all Beatles LPs, advance orders were huge, and the 300,000 figure for Revolver was no exception. So we could say that with some confidence that if you had gone out to buy the album on release day, you had a good 60 or 70% chance of getting a copy with the -1 side 2 matrix. But you could have come home with a -2 or maybe even a -3. Visually, at first glance, they're all the same. To prove that, let's look at these three mono discs. As you can see, all have identical side 2 labels, signified by the DR abbreviation for Doctor on track 4. However, all these three copies have different matrix endings on side 2. This is 606-1, this is -2, and this is -3. So it's impossible to tell which side 2 matrix any copy of the album has just by looking at the labels. Of course, I'd love to be able to play both mixes of the song for you and compare, but of course, copyright prevents that. So I'll try to explain to you the best I can the differences between the two mixes. First, the easy part. Remix 11, the withdrawn mix, is 3 seconds longer than Remix 8. To help illustrate some more differences, I've recorded Tomorrow Never Knows from all of the original UK mono variations, -1, -2 and -3. All were recorded on the same equipment at the same volume and without any alterations to the EQ. So in this first comparison, we can see -1 above and -2 below. And straight away, you can see that the waveform of the -1 is wider than the -2, which is due mostly to the vocal being mixed much louder. The -2 cut below is significantly quieter and has a more pronounced midsection between 55 seconds and 1 minute 20. However, feel free to pause the video to make your own analysis and let me know what you think in the comments. There are, of course, a number of differences in content between the two mixes, a few of which I'll try to explain. Firstly, on the -1, the tape loops are faded up at slightly different times and drop out in the spaces between the verses, which allows the drums and tambora to be heard for a second or two before the next verse starts. Also, John's vocal on the first two words of the song on the -1 version don't have the Leslie speaker effect on them like in the rest of the song. There are a number of other small variations in the mix, but the most easily identifiable one is the presence of a few extra seconds of barrel house piano at the end of the fade of the Remix 11, which is not present on Remix 8. Thinking back, I remember the first mono copy of this album I owned had the alternate mix of Tomorrow Never Knows on it, because I remember the piano bit at the end. But I didn't think it was anything special at the time. After all, I knew that the mono mixes were different from the stereo mixes, and I certainly didn't think of comparing multiple mono copies with each other. It wasn't until the mid-1990s that someone, I believe from Japan, discovered that there were two different mixes. Since then, the 606-1 pressings have been highly prized, and are sold at a premium, and make this already outstanding album that little bit more special. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a big thumbs up, and even better, why not subscribe? And I'll be back with more very soon. But I'll say bye for now, and thanks for watching.